We're live.
Mm.
I'm going to get to it. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Working Towards Black. Working Towards Black is a series of conversations really to help us bridge the gap between the diaspora and the continent, and even all of the inner workings within the diaspora. And we are looking through these conversations to really begin to grow understanding amongst each other, to be able to bridge some of the gaps that exist between us and to dispel myths and rumors and misconceptions between us and to build relationship. That is the purpose. And so today we have Sossina Tafari. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
You did.
Okay. All my friends in the continent are always making fun of me at the beginning of the show of how I pronounce people's names. So I'm always practicing before now we get started. And I just want to read your bio real quick, if you don't mind. So Sossina has been in the entrepreneurial space for over 2 years, working with organizations to define their message and achieve their set goals. Using her past experience in senior leadership positions, Sossina has been instrumental in designing and delivering on company strategies, first by differentiating the company and its goal from others, and then applying laser-focused processes in order to deliver the desired result. And today we're going to get into some of the work that she's doing here and for the government and on the continent. And thank you so much, Sossina, for joining us today.
Sure, a pleasure.
So I always kind of start out with, where this starts. I like to know where you're from, what it was like growing up as a young child in your country.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. It's I have to say, COVID has taught us how to become an online community. So we're slowly warming up to the idea of having these conversations online. So thanks. A little bit about my background. I am originally from Ethiopia by way of Cleveland. I was actually born in Cleveland, and then my parents and I moved back to Ethiopia because my father and mother were very critical about raising myself and my brother in Ethiopia. And, I attended school through 12th grade, and then promptly at the university juncture we were shipped back to the U.S. for further education. I did my undergrad degree at Penn State University of Penn State College. I don't know that I knew what I was doing. I was very young when I came back to the U.S. So I chose my major on a it sounds good kind of deductive reasoning, not really, focused on where I wanted to end up. By chance, I got a job. I was pursuing my master's degree in the Baltimore area, and by chance, I landed on a job with a company called MCI, which today people will recognize as Verizon. And I spent 27 glorious years in the telecom industry, where I learned the boot camp process at MCI. But I was fortunate enough to have joined many types of organizations, small, large, multinational, niche markets. And I would say that the last 10 years of my career, I spent working on the continent of Africa and the Middle East. I have traveled to over 60 countries globally, wearing the telecom hat. And at the end of 2018, I decided that it was time to move on. And so I re-enrolled in school. That's my safe haven. I think I have 6 or 7 degrees now, but to pursue one more. And this time in artificial intelligence and machine learning and social media science. And there's a whole science behind it. So for the last 2 years, I've focused on trying to manage companies. So hopefully that gives you a little flavor about who I am and how I got here.
So when you're parents decided that you guys need to go back so that you can be schooled and you can live as a child and grow as a child in Ethiopia, what was their thinking? Were they communicating with you what that value meant to them? Why they thought that that was going to be important for you?
We were too young. I mean, I was two when I went back, so I don't know that they I don't know that they thought that there was an option. You know, I think they wanted to go back because my dad was done with his studies.
Mm,
I don't know that, you know, the concept of me being born in the US and having a birth certificate from the US, the concept that we're used to today did not exist back in the 70s, right? It was just a function. I happened to be born here. It never registered that it had benefits or value. For them, I was Ethiopian. We were all going to go back, and that's where we were going to live. But as an option, I think my dad always thought that I could come back, or we could come back to the US for education, and that the US would look at us favorably and grant us visas to come back. To the point that when I left Ethiopia, when I was getting ready to leave Ethiopia, my dad, God rest his soul, took us through the whole process of getting an Ethiopian passport, only to be told at the US Embassy that we cannot travel to our country, quote unquote, on a foreign passport, that I had to travel on a US passport. So I remember it was back in 1986, and we had to go through that interesting
So he
process
didn't
of.
realize that you were an American because you were born here.
I think he knew that, but I didn't. I don't know that. I don't know that he did the math that I needed to travel with a U.S. passport. There's no Google back then,
Yeah,
so you think logically. I mean, he was a physician in Ethiopia, so he was well traveled. He knew
absolutely.
what he had to do, but he didn't do that math that I needed to travel on it. But here we are. They thought being cultured was important, and it helped us become um, or helped me become a well-rounded person. I understand both worlds, and here I am, lucky enough to consider working on both continents. And yeah.
Nice. What does it mean to you to be Ethiopian? Does that have a specific like sense of identity and pride? Is that something that's deeply important to you?
Of course it is. I think identity is, let me take it a different, let me answer that question a different way. I have a child who's 21 years old. And for me, I grew up, when I came to the US and I enrolled in college, I didn't fit anywhere. I couldn't relate to the African American community here because I didn't understand that culture, and I'm being very honest about this.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I couldn't fit in with the Caucasian community because you know that was also different, and so I was just there. I was just. I mean, if you ask me, do you keep in touch with any of your college friends? I might keep in touch with three or four. But other than that, considering the number of hours I spent on the campus, the people that are close to me are the people that I went to grade school with them, because that's the culture that binds us. That's how I grew up. I grew up with that culture, and that's what kept us together. That's the glue that held us together, and it continues to hold us today. So to answer your question, it's very important to know, I'm glad I know my roots. I'm glad I know my culture. I'm glad I understand it. And 100% I embrace it because it's who I am.
Mhm. So when you're growing up as a little girl in Ethiopia and you're going through the schooling system, you're not necessarily having are you having connection with America and Black American experience? I mean, the 70s and like that, all of the aid, that's a prime time for like Black Power movement. And is Ethiopia disconnected from that conversation at that point?
I had no idea. I think the only reference I remember was, Shaft in Africa or something like that. But I have no, I don't know that I even, I mean, the answer is no. I didn't have any clue. How you have to watch movies, or you have to watch TV, or you have to, be glued to a TV screen. We didn't have that then.
Mhm.
When I grew up, we had 3 hours of TV, of which 90% of it was socialist propaganda. So
Mhm.
I had no idea.
Mm. So what is happening? So one of the things that I try to do with this, because I realize like, we take for granted that people kind of know what it's like to be a kid or to grow up in a particular set of values. And we don't really know. Like they're all so different. What is growing up like in Ethiopia? What are you doing every day? What is schooling like? What are the core values of that particular community?
So for us, my my parents raised us in a very protective environment, because the the political situation in the country was not good. My formative years when I was in Ethiopia, I mean, was it safe? It was safe, but they protected us from a lot of the noise that was around us. I got up in the morning, I went to school, my mom came and picked us up from school, we came home, wash, rinse, repeat. There was no creativity or anything like that there. And in the summers, we'll go to a lake where, all the, my parents' friends, there's a close knit group of families. We all, sectioned off 2 weeks in the summer, and we got shipped over to this lake. We spent our 2 weeks there and came back, and that was about it. I mean, we'd see family from time to time. It was a very slow and monotonous lifestyle, but it was a safe lifestyle that we lived. When I think of how we live today and how I raised my son, we're like on steroids almost. No time to breathe. You're running from one chaos to another chaos. It's very different. But back then, it was a very relaxed, slow existence, and it worked.
So when you transition to the US and you enroll in college and you feel disconnected, right? Like what are some of the cultural things and cultural nuances that you're noticing that are so different from you? What is happening around you that you're noticing?
So I'm talking about something that happened 30 years ago. So I'm going to date myself here a bit. Um, I think when I came, it was when I first landed and I went to school here. I think the first thing I would say is that there's that awe. You're like, oh, I'm in America. You read your Archie comics and your Jughead comics, and you read Nancy Drew, and you think everything is around. It's how it's described in these books that we read.
Mhm.
It's not. It's different. And I think every day, our goal, my goal was just to survive the current day, until to the next day. And then, days became weeks became months became years. And it was more of a survival.
Survival? What were you surviving? Was it a sense of loneliness? Was it isolation? Was it
I don't know, just getting over. I think you grew up with somebody doing everything for you, right? The only responsibility I had in Ethiopia was to study. That's it. I had no other responsibility. It wasn't that we were well off. It wasn't. We were a middle income household. But, somebody made my food for me. Somebody took me to school. Somebody picked me up from school. It was very little thing. There was hardly anything that I would do for myself. But
Mm-hmm.
you come to the US and all of a sudden, I'm responsible for my money, I'm responsible for my time management, I have to get my studies done. It's a different country. There's no mom or dad there. I mean, it's a different, you move into survival mode. That's why I said I'm just going from day to day, getting things
Mm-hmm.
done. I don't know that I realized that until now, right?
Yes.
So I think when I look back and I think about some of the trauma I experienced, and I don't mean trauma as in bad trauma, I just means,
Is
the
there good
shock.
trauma?
I mean, trauma meaning, no, there's no good trauma, but it's not trauma as in damaging me trauma, more than, it's more like I was probably scared, probably, the fear of the unknown. I think there was something there that kept me moving in adrenaline mode,
Yes.
um, you know, how do you make ends meet? Okay, I have to find a job. Okay, let me get a job and make sure I pay rent. Oh yeah, there's rent. Oh, there's utilities too. And then and it was just a cascading lifestyle. It wasn't that we splurged or anything, but it was just survival. At the
Yes.
end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And information was difficult to reach. You don't have anybody to turn to get information. So we really had to survive the endeavor. When I look at my child now, if he's stuck, he can pick up the phone and call me. if he
Yes.
if he can't reach me, he can reach his uncles. He can Google things. All this was not there when we came to the US. So it's a different set of circumstances, and uh, I really feel that it was it's the rite of passage. It kind of strengthened us to become tolerant and observant and kind and giving, and we
Mm-hmm.
put our best efforts. I think while there was no textbook that we went through, I think the processes that we went through taught us how how to stay in the good lane as opposed to the destructive lane, because I have friends who went down the destructive lane and that
Mm-hmm.
didn't well.
Were they just struggling with being an immigrant and not having connection? And so they got into other things that were
Yeah,
destructive for them.
yeah.
So while you're here and you're in college, what is your experience with African Americans? How are you relating, if at all? What is the conversation even in your head?
So it was interesting. The school I attended was it's the largest university in the US, or back then it was. I think with 90,000 students, there were 3,000 African Americans. So it was a very
Small.
David and Goliath kind of situation there. I think the decision, I went into the African American community and I realized that I didn't fit in. I didn't understand the English they were speaking. It wasn't that they were speaking differently. It was just, I just had a hard time following, what was going on. And I think that frustration pushed me away from that group. But I did befriend some football players and some, and I think it might have been that a lot of the African American community members came from the Philly area, and
Mhm.
they all knew each other. They were, um, uh, their urban experience was very different than the experience I had. So I really didn't fit in. But I tried. I tried a couple of times because I had friends in other universities that were thriving, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't have the same relationship with the group that was available to me. Um, I think what ended up happening is I made friends at other campuses, at other universities, and they I'm still in touch with.
Okay.
So um,
With other Ethiopians or African Americans
African
or
Americans, African
mm,
Americans. The Ethiopian community, we kind of stuck together, right? So I went to a very small school. Everybody is like a brother and a sister to me. Once we all landed here, we all, found each other. And to this day, we're still together. I mean,
Mhm.
that glue is set. Nothing's going to change us. But as far as specific to the African American community, the relationships I have today are very different than the relationships of my experience when I had in college. Now I have awesome friends that get me, I get them. We do things together. Just beautiful souls. But at that
What
point,
changed? What changed? What opened up that space to develop new relationships?
I think it's just I think things. Coming down towards the DC area, I think this urban area in DC is different. I think from the community that I was exposed to in central Pennsylvania. Um, I think times have changed. I think the melting pot has expanded. I think people's perception of, like, when I came from Ethiopia, people would look at me and say, "I thought everybody, was starving in Ethiopia," or they're like they would make
Ah, I forgot about that whole that there was that whole phase of just all of the imagery and
right.
yeah,
So I think we got through that stigma phase, I think.
yeah.
And as the Ethiopian community ballooned in the DC area and people started experiencing more and more interactions with
The
the
osetives.
yeah, the diaspora community, it became, I think the relationship started to strengthen and solidify. And I can say definitely, as I made my move from Pennsylvania to Maryland, from Maryland into Northern Virginia, where I live now, things have, and of course, the sign of the times, everything has changed now. It's very different. It's very accommodating. I find more like-minded people. Yeah, maybe time. Maybe it's
Yeah.
time. I don't know.
So when we spoke first, you had very interesting ideas around these three layers of identity. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to really talk about that, how you understand these layers. And I didn't know if it was specific for an African in this culture or in general. So
Oh goodness. I have to remember what I said to you.
I think we
uh,
talked about ethnicity versus race versus culture, maybe. I can't
sure.
remember there was, yeah.
Okay. So, when initially when I never look at my skin color, right? I grew up as a human. Nobody ever, it's not a discussion that was ever at the table, for me. And when I came to the US, I was in Ethiopia. That's it. I grew up there. That's my origin, and it never mattered for me. But in hindsight, as I look back to see, when you go back and you try and look at your past, you want to understand, you want to do the math on what went wrong. Where did I misunderstand something? Why do I feel different today? And why did I not feel different in the past? What changed along the way? Is a question I tend to ask myself, especially in the last 18 months. I've never, ever felt that I was different, you know. I can even give you an incident where I sent my son to a small private school in the area that I live. And when I went to pick him up, the first week of school, somebody asked me, "Whose child are you here to pick?" And I didn't find that offensive, because
Yeah.
my reasoning was, they just don't know any better. you know I would attach an excuse to every inappropriate questioning. Let's leave it at that. Yeah, I didn't care. It didn't bother me.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last 18 months to 2 years, I have seen enough to wonder if it's right to not be aware of what's going on. So I try to do the math between, okay, we have to be proud of where we came from. So we're Ethiopian Americans. I don't like the word diaspora because it just, doesn't mean anything to me, but we're hyphenated Americans. So we're Ethiopian Americans, just like there's Italian American, there's Polish American, there's Irish American. We're Ethiopian Americans. That's it. That's how we identify ourselves. And it's important that kids know their identity. And I think that's the angle that I was looking at. I want my son to know that he's an Ethiopian American. He should be a proud Ethiopian American. He should be a contributing member. He was born in the United States. He has pledged allegiance to the flag. Everything that comes with that package, we are Ethiopian Americans. But when it comes to our skin color, and I speak with an accent. It's amazing how quickly I can go from 10 to 0, where I am nobody in no time, when someone thinks that I'm from overseas. And I've experienced all sorts of nonsense, especially in the last 2 years. And I keep telling myself, do I fight back or do I let it go?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm at that crossroad now where it's time to stand up and push back and say, no, it's enough, and if we don't say that, who's going to say that? That's the challenge I face. And I don't remember what we talked about because I go off on tangents, but hopefully I touched on it.
It was very eloquent and beautiful. And this was just as eloquent and beautiful, so that's fine. But I do think that there's this very interesting space that I understand because I've spent so much time on the continent, that when you grow up, one in I say black space, but that isn't how someone would see it, right? They would see it as their cultural space where they understand themselves. It's a pretty homogeneous understanding of the world. The relationship to race is so dramatically different. And then to come to the United States and then be racialized, if you've never been racialized, you may reject that understanding of race. And I always find it interesting when I talk to, especially Africans that are kind of in that old, where they've migrated maybe like 70s and 80s and or the 90s, and then now they're kind of experiencing this kind of awakening. Do you feel like you're going through an awakening around race?
Yes, and everywhere. It's happening in Ethiopia also, where I grew up not knowing or not paying, not I shouldn't say not knowing, but not paying attention to ethnic lines. The ethnicity is becoming an issue in Ethiopia now. There's racism here, that whether we like it or not, we got to address the elephant in the room. To answer your question, I don't know that I questioned it. I think I always knew it was there. I just didn't want to bother with it. I didn't want to bring it into my space because I felt it was toxic. But now it's at a point where we have to say, look, it's there. How do we reconcile? How do we, and we have to be careful, because at the end of the day, somebody like me, I came to the US 30 years ago. There are people before me who came a different way to the US who have even worse wounds. I don't have any wounds. I'm fine. I'm getting skin abrasion from time to time, but there are people who've given their life to and they're the ones. It's their fight. It's their story that breaks me more than what I experience. What I'm experiencing is ignorance, but the story is not it, and we just get lumped under one umbrella. but we have to carry the torch for everybody. Being quiet is not an option anymore. And when you and what's really amazing to me is people that I thought were together and who understand us, the colors, the vial, the turning their face another way, it's really opened my eyes on how people view the situation and how very few stand up for, and I adore some of my friends who have stood up and said enough alongside us. And
Yeah.
there's a good number, but still there's a lot of work that needs to be done, because to be honest, I had no idea that it was this bad.
So I always think that when you're traveling, you don't have the the personal connection to the history, right? So if I went to Ethiopia, I could enjoy Ethiopia in a different way because I'm even in the midst of the chaos that's going on now with the ethnic issues that are going on the ground. I don't have the historical hurt of those things, right? And so I can understand this idea of feeling like it's not really my fight, and you feel disconnected. But I think race becomes very interesting with the African community because you're brown. And when a police goes to shoot somebody, they're not saying, "Are you Ethiopian?"
Yeah.
Like, "Are you Jamaican?" Have you started to recognize when you think about blackness, have you began to recognize yourself as a Black woman? Or is it still really tied to Ethiopia? And then there's just a consciousness around this idea that, oh, the racism is increasing and it affects you.
That's a very good question, actually, because it's something that Ethiopians get accused of quite a bit, where we don't want to live under the umbrella of being Black. I like the definition of Black and brown. I think that helps us come under one umbrella and figure out how to use all our tools in order to fight this fight.
In what way? When you say you like the definition of Black and brown, what do you mean?
So when we think of, we want to, when I look at Ethiopians, for instance, the more north you go, the more lighter skinned we become. And the more south we go, the more darker skinned we become as a country. And there is a certain level of identity that we have to embrace, right? So I can say I am Black, and I go to my son and I say, "Am I Black?" And he'll say, "Well, you're not Black, you're brown," right? So we have to fit under a definition, right? We have to help kids come to the drawing board, so to speak, so that we can all fight the fight together. And it's the same thing with Asians. If you say Asian American versus, if you've traveled in Asia, if you call a Chinese person a Japanese and a Japanese person a Singaporean, they get offended very quickly. They're not all lumped under the same umbrella. And I think taking away that one big umbrella and saying, look, we're all in this together. We all need to fit under this umbrella, and we need to focus our fight on this one fight of racism. I think it brings us under one umbrella so that we can get it done. Because I can tell you,
is it like an inability? Is it the desire to not have the relationship to Blackness? So to be clear, I think of Blackness as a political identity. It's not a skin color issue.
So I think that's a fuzzy line for us. For me, at least, for me, it's a fuzzy line. I take the literal translation. And I think a lot of the children beneath us, they also I always look at it from the youth perspective, because, when I made that click in my mind, when the African American community or the Black American community would not accept me, I felt that I wasn't Black enough. you
When
know.
you say they didn't accept you, in what ways? Like, in specifically?
I just didn't fit in there. I wasn't like them. I didn't speak like them. I didn't have the same cultural sensitivities. I didn't understand, you know, the sentences they were constructing. I don't know how to explain to you. It's
Did they make you feel bad about yourself?
oh yeah, yeah. I
Hmm.
mean, not being accepted makes you feel bad at the end of the way. It makes you wonder why you don't fit, right? It makes you question why you don't fit.
Mm.
And
I'm hearing it. I just want to make sure because this is the time I feel like to work out some of these ideas.
Mhm.
Because I've heard it say before, like, because it's one thing, right, to not feel connected or like you fit, right? It's another thing to for someone to say, I'm not accepted. So was there a space, and I've seen it happen, so it could absolutely be that. But was there something specifically that African Americans were doing to you to make you feel like you didn't belong there? Were they excluding you from conversations because of your accent? Were they, because sometimes I wonder where when this starts, like what are the little igniting things that happen?
so now I'm kind of going from memory from 30 years ago. So you have to pardon me. I I always try. So my some of the stories I'm sharing with you, I am paralleling it to the 20 somethings that are around me and what they experience, right? So when they go to a formal, or when they go to an event and they are included, I kind of parallel it back to my experience and wonder why I wasn't included, you know. um, I remember, for instance, I was invited to join a sorority,
Mm,
and and I didn't even make it past the first, whatever, the meet and greet. I mean, the girls said, nope, she's not part of us.
mm,
Okay. And I did this because somebody told me it's the best place to make friends.
mm,
Okay. But if I went to a different group, and that group accepted me. So I was like, okay, what did I do wrong?
mm-hmm,
And you start focusing on yourself. And at that point, I said, okay, you know what? The Black American community, and back then nobody called there wasn't an African American
oh
community, it
yeah,
was a Black
absolutely.
American community. And I think that might be the reason why I like the idea of black and brown, because I think it takes care of all of us. Because back then I wouldn't be accepted as a Black American, but because I didn't have the right, boxes checked off. Maybe that's the reason why. I don't know. I don't know that I've
Mm.
thought about it, but
I would love to get some memoirs, like to think about that more deeply and have you one day come back, or because I do think that sometimes these disconnections that we feel aren't always necessarily true. Sometimes they are absolutely true. I know when I've been on the continent and I felt excluded, I realized that I didn't understand language. And language is something so specific, especially on the continent, that I mean, even if you're Ghanaian and you're Twi and someone else is Ashanti, like just because of the language differences, they might have
yeah.
these separations. And when I started to kind of understand the nuances of those cultures, I realized I wasn't necessarily being excluded, but I didn't understand. And because I didn't
Yeah.
understand, and then there are times where I think that people were being blatantly disrespectful and rude and not accepting me for whatever they thought African Americans were based on television and their perceptions. But I do find it curious, like when those initial moments ignite where we start to disconnect, and those, I think, are the spaces where I feel like we need to go back and either figure out how to heal those and make sure that our children don't perpetuate those same things, and that's exposure, or experience those things. I would love to see my daughter be in a world where a young African girl would seem the same to her as her.
Yeah. I have to tell you that my college experience, my educational college experience was above my expectations. As I told you, I didn't know enough, I think I wasn't exposed to enough. I didn't start off in an urban area. I started off in a rural area. And I come from a capital city. So I went from being in a capital city that was, and then I'm straight into,
the country.
exactly. So I don't know if that had something to do with it, because again, I'm very good at compartmentalizing and blocking information. So if I don't want to think about it, I just put it in a little box and throw it back into my memory bank, and that's it, because that's my survival skills. It's not.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I can flip this conversation and tell you, look, I've traveled to most of the Anglophone countries in Africa. And there were countries where I was like, oh my gosh, I can live here. And then there were countries where I was like, there's absolutely no way in hell that I'll stay in these countries. Not because I didn't want to, but I didn't feel like I belonged.
Yes. And that
And
the belonging is interesting. That's why I think this idea of Blackness, it creates some sense of unity because there is a shared experience. There's not one African nation I've ever been to that doesn't have a shared experience of colonialism, of racism, of whatever it is. They might not recognize it that way, which I find interesting. And Ethiopia is especially interesting to me. And I want to talk about this because I lived in Italy. And so when I lived in Italy, I lived amongst a lot of Ethiopians, as and I always loved the story of Ethiopia pretty much kicking the Italians behind and like kicking them out. And like, it was such a source of pride for me. And I wasn't even Ethiopian. I always loved that story about it. And I always found these relationships very interesting. And then when I studied in Russia, all of the Russian priests would be sent to Ethiopia to study. And I at 16 saw, Mary and Jesus painted as black, because they were taking Orthodox Ethiopian Christianity in the Russian context. And so I wonder, like, as an Ethiopian, being the one nation that was never colonized, do you think that that had some space within how you understood yourself?
not really.
No.
No, I mean, for me, it's a national pride thing. Yes, we didn't grow up talking about that, because we lived under a socialist regime, and again, it was another 16, 14, 15 years of survival mode, for my parents at least. All their effort was just to get us educated and to make sure things didn't get worse, and the first opportunity they had, after we finished school, was to give us the opportunity to learn something overseas, to get better education. I know when I left Ethiopia, the understanding was that I would come back. I would go back to work there and to have to live in Ethiopia. Didn't work out that way, clearly. So, but for me, part of me is on the continent. While I love America and I love everything that's around me, and I'm very dedicated and understanding of the privileges that I have in these United States. I still feel that Africa needs us. We are the only brand ambassadors for the continent that truly understand what the continent needs, and how to help them not be preyed on, because that's what I feel that they're going through at the moment. Is that I feel like the whole continent, like everybody's looking at it with a magnifying glass. But as far as the whole colonization, I'm not very deep in the history aspect, but I can tell you that unless Africans respect Africans, and we start divorcing the idea that the answers all lie from the donor countries, our continent is going to continue to suffer. And for me, that's kind of the mission I picked up 2 years ago, and I'm trying to do that work. It
Let's
takes
talk
time.
about it. What are you doing? What are you doing? Tell me all about it.
So I think the tipping point for me was I read an article that was produced out of South Africa. I think the company, the organization sits in South Africa, and there was a list produced, and the list's title was 100 popular brands of Africa. I think was the name of the list, and on there were only 4 African brands. Everything else was Coca-Cola, Mercedes-Benz, Audi. They were all American, European brands. And I'm like, how on earth is this continent ever going to win this war on branding? And it was an organization that was donor funded, African, African run. Their objective was to promote the continent, and they are promoting the same products. So I had a aha moment, and I said, okay, you know what, let's try and see what we can do around branding. And so from there I started an entity called Media for Africa, where we focused on just curating positive stories of the continent, and started pushing this out. We have about 300,000 followers who receive our posts when we post these articles. We don't write the articles; other people write it, but we kind of aggregate it so people can read the positive articles through our website. From there, I started helping people. I'd say Africans, people on the continent, people in other places that want to work with the continent, who needed a digital strategy or a strategy in order to work with this community. And we started with 4 pro bono clients that we did their social media strategy for. I think we're now servicing about 45 clients.
Wow.
And growing. I am, and I do a few things. So I'll just focus on the Media Africa project. So every month or every other month, we take on 1 or 2 pro bono clients and kind of help them through the process. I don't engage with anybody without knowing what they need first. So we try to understand the client, their needs. We'll spend time with them. We'll see if our values align, because a business relationship is just a business relationship. I would prefer to have a meaningful relationship where I can see a company grow and achieve their goals. So we do anything from website design to, as I said, social media strategies, lead generation strategies. In some cases, I rewrite their business plans for them. I help them pivot. I'll give them advice whether they like it or not. But I try to really give them everything they need in order to be successful. Now, it takes 2 to tango, so the other side has to be willing to have the dialogue. And I can't say that everybody was a slam dunk, but progress happens. Some very fast, some very slow, but and then eventually, I think my goal is to, I saw a lot of talent on the ground in Africa as I was traveling, and a lot of them do not, outside of their cocoon, they don't realize that there's a huge world outside that wants to support them. And, if we can figure out the logistics, I would rather buy directly from the continent. If I want a leather bag, or if I want a Christmas gift, or if I want a pair of sandals, I'd rather give them the money than, Michael Kors or
Mm-hmm.
Prada or any of these guys. I mean, I'd rather send it there because I know it'll have a direct impact. We just have to figure out the logistics, how to get the product from where it is to where we are. So that's where I spend most of my time. I am in love. I love what I do. Time is means nothing to me anymore. Now I will plow in as much time as needed to help. And yeah, I'm
Yeah.
happy.
So I would normally end this by asking, what is blackness to you? But I don't think we're there yet. I think we're still working towards blackness with you.
Yes.
So I do want to ask you this. When you think about the things that are plaguing Africa, what are the parallels that you see for the things plaguing the African American community? Do you see the intersections of our experiences?
Uh, yes and no. Yes, in the sense, parallels of experiences. We're afraid of growth. I've noticed, both here in the U.S., the African American community that I see. In fact, I'm a member of the Black Chamber in Northern Virginia, and I listen to entrepreneurs speak there. And one of the directors the other day said, and I didn't realize this, that a big portion, and I want to say he said 90% or 80%, but a big portion of the African American businesses are sole proprietors. They're a one man or two man operation, and growing is a challenge. And I don't know why. I mean, I'm going to clearly look into this. Is something that I came across very recently. And that's the same challenge I see on the continent. Is I see a lot of small operations that are unable to expand. I mean, we're trying through government programs and donor programs to get these small operations to become bigger and on the continent. But right here in my neck of the woods, we have the same problem.
Mhm.
So how we resolve those kind of issues, I don't know. I mean, you need really strong leadership. You need the government to be part of you need the government to be a stakeholder. You need many stakeholders in order to get through this Herculean effort. It's almost
Do you
like.
do you feel like you know enough about the historical context of the continent, how we got there, from that angle and from the US? Is there enough historical education and to understand the institutions that exist that prevent growth? Or do you think it's just a mindset?
I think it's a mindset. I think it's a mindset because I'm a good example, right? I refused to conform, and I've blown through. Like, I'm not your typical African American person, right? I had the same set of rules. I, started with one college degree. I forced my way through. I kept pivoting until I found what I wanted. And I don't know that I am the exception to the rule. I think there are a lot of people like me out there. I think in business, though, in entrepreneurship, there is a disconnect, especially in the U.S. I think, and we can have this conversation again. As I said, I've recently embraced to understand what's going on. Um, I do I do think there's a level of there's an access issue, and there is a lack of information issue. Uh, there are programs for minorities, but are they in reach? I'm actually going through this process to understand it because I want to see. Do I
Oh, we're
get,
gonna bring you back, Sossina, because
you
you're
know?
gonna get all this new information, and then we're gonna have a whole new conversation
Yeah. I,
around. I mean, I'm curious. So, what would you say is the typical African American? You aren't one, and so what is one?
oh, I mean, I don't mean it
No, no,
in
I'm not offended. These are the
a
things we have to talk about, right? Like these are the ideas that I think we have to deconstruct. So I'm fascinated by it. I'm not offended by any of it.
no, what I meant, I'm not your typical African American. I didn't mean it in a way where um, I meant it in such a way that I drive more. I drive to get what I want because I was trained by other, people who drive and get what they want.
Mhm.
Someone recently said to me, why is there a fear for so I don't know if you know the statistic, the number of African Americans who actually applied for an SBA loan
Mhm.
was 10%, 15%, a very small number compared to our Caucasian uh,
Mhm.
uh, counterparts.
Mhm.
So the Caucasian side, there was something like a 90% participation rate, whereas on the African American side, there's a 10%. So that clearly tells us they're afraid of loans,
Or
or
they think that they don't have the credit to
or they
be
have
able to. They think they don't have the credit to be able to qualify.
correct. And even though they've said up to $25,000, all you have to have is a heartbeat. Right?
Right.
So I said, okay, let me go through the process myself rather than me, wondering, let me try. And a friend of mine and I, both the same size business, we both started the process together.
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm not going to tell you what happened because I don't want to,
You want to call attention to all that money you got.
yeah, not a lot, trust me. But this is just a let's test it and see what happens kind of thing. And it was interesting. The vetting process is different. The checks and balances are different. I mean, she and I are exactly the same thing. The only thing that differentiates us is our appearance.
So that's where I am going to end this because I think that this will be a continuum. We're going to come back. I find like I'm excited about consciousness. I think anytime people start to see what's happening around them is an exciting time because once you get into consciousness, everything can shift. And that's where real change can happen. And, you start to understand yourself differently and the things around you differently. So I'm so curious what your journey is going to be like a year from now, especially because I'm sure you're a researcher and you're going to start researching all of the things that exist. But I just have loved this conversation. Thank you very much. I
Thank you for
appreciate
having me.
you.
Thank
Yeah, I mean, I want to point out if you guys are still watching and people that watch it on after we're finished with live, the media. Tell me, Media for Africa.
Yeah, media for the number 4 and then Africa. So media for
Yeah,
Africa.com.
it's such I'm so excited about this because there are so I always tell people there's so much negative about the continent of Africa that if you never ever ever said another bad word, you still couldn't make the playing field better, right? Like it would never be equal. And I find it challenging because in order for us to grow, I believe myself an African, which I'm sure we'll have plenty of conversations around that too. But as we grow as African people, we have to be critical. We have to be
Mhm.
thoughtful. We have to push each other. We have to ask each other better questions. And that takes not always talking about the nice things, right? But I'm always challenged with it because I know I'm in the world and I'm often showing people Africa for the first time.
Mhm.
I'm showing it through my pictures and I make I don't go to slums. I go to the best places. I go to the best restaurants. I show the best houses. And I do it because you've seen that. I don't have to show you that. There's 1,000 pictures of that.
Mhm.
But I'm excited about the work that you do, and I think it's necessary. And if you guys can check it out, Media for Africa, make sure you do that. So thank you for that work. It's absolutely necessary. But we're gonna keep challenging each other and figuring
Yes.
it out.
Yes. So thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. And if there's anything I could do to help grow your organization, let me know. I'll be happy to.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm going to call you. Don't worry. I need all the strategies I can get.
All right.
Well,
Sounds
you guys,
good.
thank you for watching Working Towards Black. Today was fascinating, and join the global movement if you have not done so on Facebook. It will keep you up to date on all of my shenanigans and all of the things that I'm doing across the continent and over the world. We have some really great projects coming up. I'm doing a Black Freedom Colony in Mexico for people that just want to escape this election season and be in some Black space and peace. So those things are listed there if you're interested in bringing yourself or your family. There is Free Black Women Magazine has launched, freeblackwomenmagazine.com, and we're always looking for writers. Hint, hint, hint. And we have writers from all over, Black women and men from Africa, from the Caribbean, from the US, now from the UK. So we're growing and expanding. So if you're interested in writing, it's a little love effort, but if you're interested in participating, we really would love to have you. So thank you guys. And I'll see you next Tuesday on Working Towards Black. And thank you,
Thank
Sossina.
you. You're welcome. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
You're
Don't
welcome.
go anywhere. Don't go.
Okay.